First task is to lay out all the benchwork frames on the floor just to make sure they fit, get them in the right places. And then we had to take some measurements, figure out what adjustment was necessary. We found that we needed to put a few spaces in to get it to fit against that diagonal wall. Even then it wasn't quite right, we had to make an adjustment. And then we had to get everything leveled in both directions and then work out where we could attach it to that diagonal wall. Chris is doing that while I worked on something else. And then he disappeared for some reason, I can't remember why. While I got the last three frames joined together, raised up onto temporary legs, and then I cut the final legs to length. I decided to put a single diagonal brace in just so that there was no chance of the sub-road bed pulling the frame out of square. And the pieces of curved sub-road bed I used to be playing with now were left over from the upper helix. At the moment, Chris is off cutting all the other pieces from a single sheet of plywood while I start work on putting together the two crossovers, which are going to have to be installed over the far side. By the time I'd done that, Chris was back with the sub-road bed all cut. I had him make one curve as long as he possibly could out of a full sheet and then draw round it as often as possible to cut a whole lot of smaller pieces out of the offcut in the same sheet. And these end curves are a slightly smaller radius than over the rest of the railroad, just so that it fits on the 78-inch width of the benchwork. And what I'm doing now is using the full curve as a pattern to join all the short pieces together, saving the long curve for the upper deck later. Now I have to make sure the end curve is in exactly the right place before attaching it. I got everything joined up at the back. Then I worked on the front curve and the S-bend, getting all that cut to fit. I installed splice plates between all the pieces, gluing and screwing them. The screws were only temporary because they were too long and they came through, and it's a lot easier to take them out again once the glue is set than it is to cut them off. What I'm doing now is working on getting the grade as even as I can, bearing in mind, of course, that I only had 4 clamps available at this time. Towards the end of the day, Chris went off to Lowe's to buy a whole load more clamps. And then on the morning of day 2, we had these available. You can see now I'm wearing a different colour shirt, so that means we've started on day 2. And also I see the blue clamps on the floor. What I'm doing now is going round systematically, getting the sub-road bed as flat and level as I can in both directions. Getting the grade and the vertical curve smooth, and get it level transversely all the way. I did it in 2 halves because there was enough clamps to get the first half clamped temporarily. And then once I was happy with that, I screwed everything together and salvaged the clamps so I could work on the second half. Now I'm putting the foam road bed down, starting in the back corner where the turnouts are, making sure I've got the wide piece in the right place to be under the crossovers. And after that, the rest of the foam sub-road bed goes very quickly. I used masking tape to hold the ends in place so they didn't spring out. Now I'm getting everything organised, ready to start track laying. And once again, I'm starting in the back corner, getting the crossovers organised. I can't glue them down yet because I've still got to drill holes for the switch machines. And since the shop vac is now in place, that means I was vacuuming up all the sawdust. And then once the turnouts for the crossovers were properly installed, I joined all my flex track together in pairs to make 6-foot lengths. That minimises the number of joints on the curves, which are always going to be a potential source of problems if you're not careful. And even when you are careful, they're still fairly critical. Hence the need for wanting to minimise the number of them. And it's just a case of working my way around, I started at both ends and then filled in the bit in the middle. And I'm using cans of Mountain Dew as track weights to hold it in place while the glue sets. Now I'm getting the bus wires installed, running those around from one end to the other and getting them hooked up to the ends that I left when I built the helix. Now I'm drilling holes to drop feeder wires and prepping those feeders, getting them all in the holes. Now I'm going to go around from one end to the other systematically and solder all the top ends. With all the top ends soldered, it's just a simple matter of lying on the floor under the bench work and running around again to hook up all the bottom ends. Now it's time to prep the switch machines for the 4 turnouts. Since it's 2 crossovers, it's 2 master and slave pairs instead of 4 individual switch machines. I'm getting those installed. But of course I still have to hook up the switch machine power first. And then once I've done that, I had a general clean up, put a locomotive on the track and gave everything a test. Now we're just getting ready to install the second deck of the benchwork. I got the first piece in, and unfortunately it wasn't properly attached to the wall and it fell. I was lucky in that it didn't dent the track underneath, so I dodged a bullet there. And then it's just a simple case of copying what we did below, putting the frames in one at a time on temporary legs. And then once I was happy that I had the level right, I just cut permanent legs to keep the frames the right distance apart. I didn't bother putting in a diagonal brace on this level because there was already enough rigidity between the 2 levels. As I mentioned in another video, there was no point in going any further and getting the track bed in because we had to work from the bench work under the main yard area, which was at this point still unfinished. And since I wasn't going to be finishing the track and sub-road bed on this level, I just put all the remaining pieces on top of it so they'd be out of the way. And then I went over to work on the track in the paper mill area while Chris finished up here. He cut strips of plywood to add the safety fences around both sides of the lower road bed and did a good clean up. And now we're basically done.